Good morning. We're on Chapter 2, Biology 1. We'll be talking about cells, the building blocks of life. Here's what we want to go over. We want to look at the cell, a small factory, the types of cells, the prokaryotic cells, the plant cells, and animal cells. And then we wanted to define what organelles are, tell you a little bit about those. So we start by recognizing that atoms and molecules go together to form cells. The cells are made up of biochemicals of various sorts. The atoms form molecules, the molecules form other molecules, and we get different kinds of cells coming from that. Single cell creatures are very simple and very limited in what they can do. Here is a protozoa. In this case, a lot of different single cells have formed colonies, but they're all single cells and they behave as single cells. Fungi, plants, and animals have a lot of cells. They're made up of, your body is made up of millions and millions of cells. These cells have different types, they're different tissues, and they have different jobs. So not all the cells are the same. The organs work together to form an organism. Different tissues do different things. Here is a type of tissue and another type of tissue. These two different types of tissues, these are two different types of muscle tissue. They have different functions, but they all work together to make the organism, the entire being, work together. Here's some more. Here's a smooth muscle cell, the green jobby. Down here are some red blood cells that we have floating around in our veins and arteries. And then this interesting little picture is a set of brain cells that we use, I hope, to think about things. Now, we think of the cell as kind of a factory. And in a factory, we have raw materials. These are the things that we start building with. We have energy that is going to put the raw materials together, and we have some sort of an assembly. Out of this comes the final product and some stuff that we just throw out and get rid of. So that's the way any kind of a factory works. Well, the cell is kind of a factory. This is a very complex diagram that you have in Chapter 2. Molecules come in and out of the cell. Some of them go from one cell to the other. Some get converted to energy molecules. Some get stored, and we'll talk about all of this in later chapters. Materials are used to make new molecules, and then proteins may be moved out of the cell. So the cell is kind of a factory, just like any other kind of factory. Now, there are a lot of different molecules inside cells. The cell interior is highly organized. There was a time when we thought the cell was just a little bag of enzymes and they were just all kind of thrown in there together. But now we know there's a very complex, complicated structure inside the cell. The cell knows where things are and what's going on. It knows how many chemicals of what kind it has. It knows what it needs. It knows what it needs to get rid of. And the cells never rest, and that's a good thing. If the cells rested, we would be in a really bad situation. Now, there are a couple different types of cells. We have prokaryotic cells and we have eukaryotic cells. The major difference is that prokaryotic cells do not have a nucleus, and this is very important in terms of passing on hereditary things. Eukaryotic cells are larger, they're more complicated. Eukaryotic cells have a nucleus, they have DNA in them. The DNA is in the prokaryotic cells, but it's not in a nucleus, and so things behave differently. Now, we have 5 kingdoms. We talked about the 5 kingdoms last time. One of them is prokaryotic. The Monera is prokaryotic, the bacteria. Fungi, animals, plants, and protista are eukaryotic. So these all have a nucleus. The Monera, the prokaryotes, do not have a nucleus. So the DNA is stored in another kind of a material. The cells are surrounded by both a plasma membrane and a cell wall. The plasma membrane controls what goes in and out of the cell. It's thin and soft, and it regulates what enters the cell and what leaves the cell. The cell wall is a little more solid, and the cell wall protects the cell from being broken, from coming apart. There are flagella in some prokaryotic cells. They help to move the cell around. And there are pili that help cells stick to surfaces in case they don't want to move around. Now here is a prokaryotic cell. You see we've got the DNA, we've got the cell wall, we've got the interior soft plasma membrane. Here's some pili, these little things sticking out from the cell. Here's a flagellum that makes the cell move, and this is a prokaryotic cell. Plant cells are eukaryotic. Plant cells have a nucleus. They contain several organelles, little machines inside the cell that have a specific function. And there's a list on page 18. We'll talk about them a little bit later today, but you need to go over that list to be familiar with what the different parts of a cell are, because these are important. Plants have chloroplasts. Now this is an important part of a plant because this allows the plant to make food out of sunlight and chemicals, and this is pretty important. We'll say more about this in another chapter. Plants have both a plasma membrane and a cell wall. So they have the plasma membrane inside, the cell wall side. This is a type of a plant cell. Notice the different organelles. You'll want to go back and look at that. Important thing is that they have chloroplasts. And chloroplasts are little green things. They don't show up green in this, but this isn't a color microscope. But they're little green things that capture the sunlight and allow the plant to make food. A very important part of a plant. Animal cells, very similar to plant cells in some ways. They don't have chloroplasts. They have a nucleus, they have DNA, and then both the animal cells and the plant cells have mitochondria, which make ATP, and this is biochemical energy for the cell. Plants do not have chloroplasts to make food using sunlight. We have to, our animal cells don't. Animal cells need other ways to get their nutrition. Animal cells only have a plasma membrane. They don't have a cell wall. Now here's a typical animal cell. Looks kind of like a plant cell. We've got our nucleus and DNA and different types of organelles that do certain things in the animal cell. Here's a nucleus, a picture of a nucleus, very complicated structure that allows us the animal cell to make proteins. And then mitochondria. Mitochondria make ATP. Mitochondria are responsible for generating chemical energy in the animal cell. And we have protists. Protists are small one-celled, usually one-celled animals, but they are eukaryotic because they do have a nucleus. The nucleus is in here. They're not very complicated, most of them. They're very simple little creatures, but since they do have a nucleus, they are considered eukaryotic. Here's another type of protist, the euglena. Euglena is kind of interesting because it has chloroplasts in it. And you can see all this green here, which is a chloroplast. And we will talk in a later chapter about what these protists have to eat and how they go about getting their food. Really pretty interesting. Okay, on page 18, this is the table of organelles. It describes the nucleus, the mitochondria, a lot of different parts of plants and animals and protists. So you want to be familiar with what these parts are. We'll be focusing on things like the nucleus. We'll talk about mitochondria. Certainly we'll talk about chloroplasts for plants and for protists. So you want to know what these different parts of a cell are. So we've talked about all living things are made of cells. Everything that is alive is composed of cells. Some things, there's only one cell. Others, like us, there are millions of cells. Cells are complex. They function like factories. They're very complicated things. They bring in materials, they bring in energy, and they produce stuff that the cell can use or that other cells need. Two basic types of cells. A prokaryotic cell, there's no nucleus inside it. A eukaryotic cell has a nucleus inside, and we use that as one of the ways to categorize the five kingdoms. Only eukaryotes have organelles inside them. A prokaryote does not have the different organelles that the more complicated systems do. Multicellular organisms, cells form tissues which form organs, and organs make up organisms. All right, there it is. Biology is fun. So, hope you enjoyed it, and we'll talk